I let my 7-year-old sister take the fall for something I did 10 years ago. It started with a broken vase. At least that's the version of the story everyone in my family still believes. If you ask my parents today what the biggest lesson my little sister learned as a child was, they'd probably laugh and tell you about the time she smashed our grandmother's priceless porcelain vase, and lied about it for hours before finally admitting the truth. They'd say it was the moment she learned to take responsibility for her actions. My sister still cringes whenever someone brings it up, even though she barely remembers it anymore. The problem is, she never broke that vase, I did, and for the last 10 years I've watched her carry the guilt for something that was entirely my fault. I've convinced myself 1,000 times that it doesn't matter anymore, that everyone has moved on, that bringing it up now would only reopen old wounds. But the older I get, the heavier that lie feels. It's become the kind of secret that creeps into your thoughts at 3 in the morning, whispering that maybe you're not the person everyone thinks you are. Back then I was 14, which is old enough to know right from wrong but still young enough to believe you can outrun consequences if you're clever enough. My sister Emily had just turned 7. She absolutely worshipped me. If I wanted to play superheroes, she'd put on a cape. If I wanted to ride bikes, she'd race me down the street even though her legs were too short to keep up. She followed me everywhere like a tiny shadow with scraped knees and missing front teeth. Looking back, it's painful to realize how much she trusted me because I did absolutely nothing to deserve that trust. I was going through that awkward teenage phase where I thought everyone was against me. My grades were slipping, my parents seemed disappointed in everything I did, and I felt like I couldn't afford one more mistake. That made me desperate whenever I messed up, and desperation makes people do ugly things. The vase sat in a glass cabinet in our living room, always polished so perfectly that you could see your reflection in it. It had belonged to my grandmother before she passed away, and my mom guarded it like it was made of solid gold. Every holiday she'd remind us not to play anywhere near it. She told us stories about how Grandma carried it all the way from Europe decades ago, wrapping it in blankets every time she moved houses. It wasn't just decoration. It was one of the few things she had left from her mother. Even as a kid, I knew breaking it would devastate her. My parents had made one rule crystal clear: don't touch the cabinet, ever. Naturally, that became the exact thing I wanted to mess with. One Saturday afternoon, my parents left to run errands, trusting me to watch Emily for a couple of hours. We were supposed to stay in the backyard, but I got bored. I found an old rubber ball in the garage and started tossing it around the living room despite knowing perfectly well that it was a terrible idea. Emily kept telling me we should go outside because Mom would get mad, but I laughed it off. I told her she worried too much. I even teased her for acting like a baby. Looking back now, that's what hurts the most. She was the responsible one and I was the reckless teenager pretending to be the grown-up. At first everything was fine. I'd throw the ball against the hallway wall, catch it and repeat. Then I started throwing it harder, trying to see how fast I could react. It became a stupid game with no purpose other than feeding my own arrogance. Emily stopped playing and sat on the couch coloring in one of her princess books. She barely looked up anymore. Then it happened. I threw the ball just a little too high. It clipped the edge of a lampshade, changed direction and flew straight toward the cabinet. I remember hearing the glass door rattle before I even realized what was happening. Time seemed to freeze as the vase tipped forward, balanced on the edge for the briefest second and then crashed onto the hardwood floor. The sound wasn't just loud, it was final. Hundreds of tiny porcelain pieces scattered across the room like shattered ice. For several seconds neither of us moved. Emily stared at the floor with wide eyes before looking at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We both knew exactly what had happened. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might throw up. All I could think about was my parents coming home, seeing the mess, and finally deciding I was the disappointment they already suspected I was becoming. I wish I could tell you I immediately owned up to it, that I acted like the older brother I should have been, but fear has a way of replacing every good instinct you have. Instead of telling the truth, I started thinking about escape. Then I heard the garage door opening. Panic completely took over. I looked at Emily and whispered, "Don't say anything." She looked confused and asked, "But you broke it." Before I could answer, my parents walked through the front door carrying grocery bags. My mom saw the shattered porcelain before she even had a chance to put the bags down. The color drained from her face. She didn't yell at first. She just stared at the broken pieces like she'd lost someone all over again. Then she quietly asked the question I had been dreading. "What happened?" There was a long silence. Emily opened her mouth, probably to tell the truth. Before she could speak, I looked directly at her and gave the smallest shake of my head. She froze, and in that single moment, everything changed. My dad looked from the shattered porcelain to me, then to Emily. Nobody spoke for what felt like an eternity. Finally my mom asked again, this time with a firmer voice, "Who did this?" My stomach was in knots. Every instinct screamed at me to admit it, but another voice, louder and uglier, kept telling me that if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe someone else would take the blame. Emily glanced at me, waiting for me to tell the truth. Instead, I avoided her eyes completely. My silence became its own answer. My parents noticed her hesitation and immediately assumed it was guilt. My mom slowly knelt in front of her and asked, "Emily, was it an accident?" My sister's tiny lip trembled. She looked at me one last time, almost begging me to speak. I didn't. After a few painful seconds, she whispered, I'm sorry." Those 3 words have echoed in my head for the last 10 years. Everything after that felt like watching someone else's life unfold. My mother wasn't cruel, but she was heartbroken. She explained how important the vase had been, how it couldn't be replaced, and how disappointed she was that Emily hadn't told the truth immediately. My dad grounded her from cartoons and took away her favorite stuffed rabbit for a week. Looking back, those punishments weren't severe, but to a 7-year-old they felt enormous. She cried herself to sleep that night while I sat in my room listening through the wall. Every sob was another opportunity for me to walk downstairs and confess. Every minute that passed made it harder. I kept telling myself I'd admit everything tomorrow. Then tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Before I knew it, the lie had settled into our family's history as if it had always been true. The strangest part was how quickly everyone accepted the story. My parents believed Emily had made a childish mistake and eventually forgiven her for it. Friends and relatives who visited occasionally heard the story whenever the topic of family memories came up. Someone would laugh and say, "Remember when Emily broke Grandma's vase?" My sister would force a weak smile and shrug, saying she had been a clumsy kid. Every single time I'd feel my chest tighten. She wasn't correcting anyone because she genuinely believed she deserved the blame. After hearing the story repeated enough times, I think she even convinced herself that maybe she'd accidentally knocked it over somehow. That's what lies do. If you repeat them long enough, they become stronger than the truth. As I got older, the guilt started showing up in unexpected ways. Whenever Emily apologized for something that wasn't her fault, I'd remember that day. Whenever she blamed herself after getting a bad grade or losing a soccer game, I'd wonder if I had helped create that habit. She grew into one of those people who always assumed they were the problem. She'd say sorry when someone bumped into her in a grocery store. She'd apologize if dinner wasn't perfect when she cooked for the family. At first I thought that was just her personality, but the older I became, the more I questioned whether I'd planted that seed. Had one moment of cowardice taught her that carrying someone else's mistakes was just part of who she was? There were dozens of chances to confess over the years. One Christmas my mom admitted she still missed that vase because it reminded her of Grandma. Another time, while helping clean the attic, I found an old photo where the vase sat proudly in the background. My mom smiled sadly and said, "It's a shame kids don't always understand how precious some things are." She wasn't trying to make Emily feel bad anymore. She simply believed that accidents happen. I opened my mouth to tell the truth right then, but the words refused to come out. I was terrified that confessing after so many years would make me look even worse. Breaking the vase had been an accident. Letting my little sister carry the blame had been a choice. Emily and I stayed close despite everything. She still called me whenever she needed advice. She celebrated my birthdays, defended me during family arguments, and even introduced me to her friends as the best big brother ever. Every compliment felt like another weight added to my conscience. She had absolutely no idea that the person she admired most had betrayed her in the worst possible way when she was too young to defend herself. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at old family photos, smiling at memories I knew were built on a lie. It made me wonder how many relationships are quietly shaped by secrets nobody else can see. Then about 3 months ago, something happened that completely shattered the excuses I'd been hiding behind. My parents decided to renovate the living room. As we packed boxes together, my mom found another small porcelain ornament that had belonged to my grandmother. She carefully wrapped it in bubble wrap before handing it to Emily and joking, "You're older now, I think I can trust you with Grandma's treasures." Everyone laughed, including Emily. She rolled her eyes and said, "I promise I won't break this one." She laughed, but there was something in her voice that wasn't really laughter. It sounded like someone repeating a joke they'd heard so many times they no longer questioned why it was funny. In that moment I realized my lie hadn't ended 10 years ago. It had been living alongside all of us, every single day since. The renovation finished a few weeks later, and my parents decided to host a small family dinner to celebrate. It wasn't anything fancy, just my parents, Emily, her boyfriend, a couple of cousins, and me sitting around the dining table telling old stories. At first it was exactly what you'd expect. Everyone laughing over embarrassing childhood memories, arguing over who cheated the most at board games, and flipping through old photo albums. Then my aunt pulled out a picture of the living room from years ago. There it was again, that porcelain vase sitting proudly in the cabinet. My aunt smiled and said, "It's a shame that beautiful thing didn't survive Emily's little accident." The entire table chuckled. Emily laughed too, but this time I didn't. I looked at her, and for the first time in years I noticed something I'd somehow ignored. She wasn't laughing because she found it funny. She was laughing because she'd accepted that this story would follow her forever. I don't know what finally broke inside me, but I couldn't sit there another second. Before I had time to overthink it, I interrupted everyone and quietly said, "It wasn't Emily." The room went completely silent. Every conversation stopped at once. My dad looked confused, my mom frowned as if she'd misheard me. Emily stared at me with a puzzled expression. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest, but after carrying that secret for a decade, I realized the truth couldn't feel any heavier than the lie already had. I took a deep breath and said, "I broke the vase. I was throwing a ball around the living room after you told us not to." Emily tried to stop me. When it shattered, I let everyone believe it was her. Nobody spoke. The silence was somehow worse than any yelling I had imagined over the years. My mom slowly sat back in her chair, trying to process what she'd just heard. My dad asked almost in disbelief. Are you serious? I nodded. Then I admitted the part that truly mattered. I explained how Emily had looked at me before answering, how I shook my head, how she apologized because I stayed silent, and how I watched her get punished without saying a single word. Every sentence felt like peeling away another layer of shame I'd been hiding behind. By the time I finished talking, I couldn't even look anyone in the eye. My mother started crying first, not because of the vase. It had never really been about the vase. She cried because she'd spent 10 years believing her youngest daughter had lied to her. She apologized to Emily over and over, saying she should have questioned things more instead of making assumptions. My father looked angry, but not in the explosive way I'd feared as a teenager. He simply looked disappointed. He told me that breaking the vase would have been an accident, but allowing my little sister to carry the blame for 10 years had been a decision I made every single day afterward. Hearing those words hurt because they were true. I hadn't lied once. I'd chosen the lie thousands of times by refusing to correct it. Then everyone turned toward Emily. She didn't cry immediately. She just kept staring at me as if she were trying to figure out whether this was some kind of joke. Finally, she asked one question I'll never forget. You knew, this whole time. I couldn't even answer with words. I simply nodded. She stood up from the table without saying anything else and walked out into the backyard. I followed her a few minutes later, expecting her to yell at me, call me names, or tell me never to speak to her again. Honestly, I would have deserved every bit of it. Instead, she asked something that completely destroyed me. She quietly said, was I really trying to tell them the truth? I told her yes. She looked down at the grass for a long time before saying, I always remembered that day differently. I remembered feeling like I had done something wrong, but I could never remember exactly what. After hearing everyone talk about it for years, I guess I just believed it was my fault. She wasn't angry when she said it. She sounded confused, almost like someone discovering that one of their childhood memories had been rewritten without their permission. That's the moment I realized the damage wasn't the punishment she'd received when she was 7. The damage was that I'd altered the way she remembered herself. I apologized more sincerely than I ever have in my life. I didn't make excuses about being a scared 14-year-old. I didn't blame fear or immaturity. I simply admitted that I'd failed her when she trusted me most. She listened quietly before saying she forgave me, but forgiveness didn't erase the disappointment. She told me she'd always believed her older brother would protect her, not use her as a shield. That sentence has stayed with me ever since. Some apologies can repair relationships. Others simply acknowledge the damage that's already been done. Things have slowly gotten better over the last few months. My parents apologized to Emily for believing the wrong person, and I've worked hard to rebuild the trust I threw away all those years ago. We still spend time together, we still laugh, and we still feel like family, but there's a small scar now that wasn't there before. Every once in a while, someone will almost mention the vase story before stopping themselves. The silence that follows reminds us all how one moment of cowardice can echo through an entire decade. The vase was replaceable. Trust wasn't. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that lies don't stay frozen in the moment they're told. They grow. They attach themselves to birthdays, family dinners, photographs, inside jokes, and memories until they're woven into the fabric of your life. Eventually, telling the truth becomes far more painful than it would have been in the beginning, but that doesn't make it any less necessary. I wish I could go back and be the older brother my 7-year-old sister believed I was. I can't. All I can do now is spend the rest of my life trying to become him. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment for more crazy confessions I get from people.